Good morning, Joe. Thank you very much for joining us. We got there just about by the skin of your teeth. We've done it. Well, thank you very much for agreeing to have a bit of a Q&A today on the Joinery Hour. So if you could just please introduce yourself as a person and company, where you're from, what you do, briefly, please.
So my name is Joseph Webster. I work for a company called Fiscali, and we deal specifically with research and development tax credit claims. I saw from the brief point that I was in the call earlier a couple of friendly faces that claims that we've worked on or had discussions with. There's been a lot of changes in the R&D space over the last couple of years. I wanted to give sort of an update on those, as well as the things to look out for within your own work, and see if there's any potential claims out there that aren't being done.
Excellent. So whenever the word tax is in a sentence, everybody gets a bit itchy under the skin and annoyed and depressed. But this is very different. So it's a positive sentence with the word tax in it. So could you just tell us a little bit about what exactly is R&D tax credits and who could claim them on behalf of your company, please?
Yeah, so it was introduced in 2000. At the time, a lot of other countries have a form of it, and it's basically to incentivize businesses to go above and beyond what their usual scope of work is. There's a couple of conditions that HMRC have on it that I'll go to at a later date, but they want to improve the UK's economy in terms of development, and they do this by incentivizing them to spend money on it, which is mainly people's time and materials wasted getting to an end product which you didn't know what it was going to be when you started it.
Right, okay. And what sort of companies can claim? Because R&D tax, research and development, a lot of people assume that you have to be walking around with test tubes in your hand in a white coat and, you know, in that sort of environment. So what sort of companies can claim or try to claim R&D tax credits?
I'd say that's the formal scope of what an R&D client is, but we've got people from fudge makers to glass blowers. It's mainly hitting the criteria. It can be in any industry. People are making new flavors, they're using new ingredients in the food and drinks market, all the way across to joinery, when you're testing out new systems, how things are going to react to specific adhesives. It's all testing. If it's been done before, then you sort of know the process, but it's when you're going into a project and not really knowing what the outcome's going to be.
Yeah, and you guys obviously can help decipher whether that is in scope or not. So I, way back in the day, actually before I met Fiscali and before the Joinery Network, I actually tried to do a claim on the Boover thresholds that we developed with a company called Boover in the Netherlands. And my accountants at the time, I run it by them because someone said you should look at R&D for that. I run it by my accountants who claim they've done R&D, and they, I wouldn't say laughed at me, but almost laughed and said, no, you haven't got anything there at all. I then actually, by hook or by crook, met your old boss from Fiscali, and I said, could you have a look at this? And actually, I did get a claim, and I think from memory, I got about 10, 11 grand just for probably an hour and a half conversation with Fiscali. So who can actually help you? You can obviously do it yourself if you have really got nothing else better to do with your time. Trust me, it's a laborious process if you've never done it before. But who else can help a business with R&D claims?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of our work now comes from these general accountancy firms. So we specialize only in R&D, so we don't do any of the general accounts. And I'd say 90% of our business is general accountancy firms that will pass us on their clients to deal specifically with the R&D element, because they know it's not a threat and they're offering the service without actually having to do any of the work for it. Anyone can claim, and that's been the issue over the last 5 years, because people haven't been putting in enough evidence for a claim, and especially over the COVID period, HMRC were just clicking the approve button for fun, and that's affecting a lot of businesses now. So I'd say it's a lot of the time about the initial conversation and establishing if there is an R&D claim there. We work on a basis that means that we can say we don't think you've got an R&D claim, but that also gives you the peace of mind, because we know every business in any sector is getting emails from potential R&D companies on a weekly basis saying, have you thought about making a claim? But having the knowledge after speaking to a specialist and understanding if R&D is something that's possible is probably the best first step.
Sure. And what should a business owner be looking for before, excuse me, before they make a decision on who they choose to help them with the R&D claim? Like, is there some sort of governing body? Excuse my ignorance, I'm not really sure. But is there some sort of governing body that you specialists belong to, or that cut you apart from competitors that perhaps don't belong to said body, or what have you?
Yeah, so our team is headed up by 2 chartered tax advisors, which is the main area to go towards. There's general accountants, which is an ACA qualification, but chartered tax advisors will have the understanding of the best way to use your tax, because for R&D, it's one of the only areas where you can actually surrender tax for losses. So even if you're in a loss-making position, you can still get a cash benefit from it. And there's 2 sort of sides to R&D. There's the report side, where we need to gather all of the evidence, but then there's also the financial side. And we've noticed on a lot of claims that were done by accountants, if they are not wanting to sort of raise any red flags, they are heavily underclaiming. And a lot of the time when we are taking a client over, even if we are having to spend an extra couple of hours with them to get more detail, we can enhance that claim quite a lot.
Sure. Okay. So when somebody speaks to you and says, Joe, do I have a claim? What are you actually looking for to substantiate? Do they have a claim, or are they sort of, leading themselves up the garden path sort of thing?
It's all going to be on a case-by-case basis. HMRC have 2 set main criteria, which, stick with me for this, is an appreciable improvement within the industry. So that is specific to the industry. So if you are, say, a joinery company and you're doing a development project in software, that would need to be an advance in the software industry. So that's where it sort of gets a bit tricky. And they say that the technological uncertainty, which is the other element, is basically if it is not readily resolvable by a competent professional in the industry. They don't set any specific guidelines for that, but it's usually someone that's worked in the industry for the last 5 years and come to a project where they don't know what the end goal, or they know what the end goal is going to be, but they don't know what the result is going to be from when they start.
Right. And
going through that.
Cool. And I know I've heard this a million times, but you guys, for our people listening, you guys as R&D tax specialists, you love a failure. You love things that have gone wrong a few times along the way, because, can you just explain that? Because it's a funny mindset. Only you guys like failure. The people doing it probably don't at the time. So just explain that, how it works.
Yeah, the initial meetings, that is our usual go-to if we're struggling to get anything. It's, what is the project that you basically want to forget about? That one where you spent the time working on and got to an end result that wasn't beneficial to you, because nothing shows research and development like a project that you started and didn't get the end result that you needed because it wasn't technically viable. A lot of the time that can be architects' designs not being feasible and them not budging, but you've spent the time on trying to develop that process, as well as materials probably, in doing prototypes for it.
Right. Okay. Interesting. So you mentioned there's been some changes. I believe it was August last year. Can you just briefly explain the changes and what that means to the likes of our client, which are predominantly woodworking specialists, KBB, door and window manufacturers?
Yeah, so the changes came in place in August, and we believe that it was mainly from the COVID period in terms of how many they were approving. It's beneficial because it means that you now have to submit a report as supporting evidence, because you previously didn't, and that's when a lot of people were just putting in low value claims, hoping to go under the radar with no real evidence for it. So you do now need to have that conversation. So it has increased the level of time that we need to spend with clients. We were doing reports previously as well, so it's not really had much of an impact, but the levels of criteria that we need to go to is probably higher than it was before. Right. But we have noticed a massive shift in businesses that were doing it either with their general accountants or with another R&D firm, where they've been passed over to us and might have got 40, 50 grand back. And then when we ask, what did you submit last year in terms of evidence, they say we didn't get anything. So it's definitely worth checking if you are with an existing provider for R&D or your accountants, that they are having in-depth conversations with you around the projects that you've got submitting, because the ones that aren't having those conversations, we're noticing, seem to be the ones that are either changing their name 6 months down the line or not contacting you back if you are getting an inquiry. We deal with an inquiry as part of our process because we will only submit something if we believe it is relevant.
And I think from memory, if you guys, or not just for Scully, but a R&D tax specialist, you deal with any back and forth with HMRC as well, because you speak their language, right?
Yeah, so we've got constant communication with HMRC all the way from submitting our higher level clients, which when they're getting in excess of $1 million back, they're probably going to ask questions. Would be surprised if they didn't, but the relationship with HMRC is good on that front. And that's probably another key aspect of using a specialist, that we've got existing relationships with them. There's not that many in the R&D department. When I started probably 9 years ago, it was 12 people. They've increased a lot since then to about 130, right. But you're still getting a lot of crossover in terms of people that you're working with, and they understand that a specialist is a specialist, so they're probably less likely to ask the silly questions around R&D.
Yeah, you're the only man on earth that smiles when he's saying you have constant communication with our HMRC.
We actually get through on the phone.
Yeah, that's another advantage. So could you just, last but not least, give us just a couple of brief examples of recent or claims that you've been involved with that are relevant to our industry and our audience today, please?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of specifics. Obviously, I can't go into too much detail, but mainly in terms of the uncertainties that we're seeing in the joinery and sort of bathroom window space. And they're structural engineering issues, which will probably be a low level one. But the main ones are architects' designs that are not feasible, and you are having to make the adaptations and the process of getting from A to B while dealing with basically an architect. Restrictions such as listed buildings that you're having to integrate into, or restrictions including site restrictions of how you're doing a development that is causing the project to change because of those restrictions. And then a small one in terms of one that we've dealt with in the last 6 months was acoustics issues. So this was a manufacturer of a door in an acoustics room, and how they were making it soundproof enough to cover the room's sound barrier, but as well as keeping the aesthetics of it. We can't just be having the aesthetics of it. It can be a part, but it needs to be that development work on how the project has got to the end goal.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed for everybody. If there's any more questions on R&D tax, Joe will jump into the R&D suite or table, and we will see you in a moment. Thanks, Joe.
Cheers, guys.